So hello and welcome to the Royal Rota. Thank you for continuing to watch the show. We do appreciate every single one of your many thousands of views. And we're rather hoping that today there won't be a significant event moments after we walked out of the studio, which is exactly what happened last time when the Duke of Edinburgh crashed his car just as we walked out of the door over there. Anyway, let me introduce you to the panel for this edition of the Royal Rota. And we're very fortunate to have from America, but as you can see currently sitting in front of me in London, is Victoria Arbiter, so you're CNN's royal contributor.
Yes.
And based in New York normally.
Yes.
And over here doing quite a lot of royal type things.
There seems to be a sudden, well, not a sudden royal interest, but a sudden rush on royal documentaries. So I think between babies and just this continuing fascination with the royal family, clearly everyone is still massively interested.
Everyone wants a bit of your time at the moment, so we're very grateful that you've given us
thrilled to be here
as well. And Lizzie Robinson, the producer in the ITV Royal Bureau, is here, as she always is, bringing her knowledge and expertise, as we were just discussing before, weren't we?
Yes.
Anyway, welcome. Now, listen, we could start on the Duke's crash, but I mean, we'll talk about that in a minute, because we all came out of here last time and all of a sudden there was a Land Rover rolling down the road in Sandringham. But anyway, let's start off on something which I think has been dominating social media for the past couple of weeks, which is this campaign by Hello magazine called Hello to Kindness, which has sort of grown out of this whole debate around Duchess v Duchess, Kate v Meghan, the princesses at war. I put that in inverted commas. It was about time that somebody said, look, we need to calm this all down, guys, wasn't it?
Definitely. And I think it's really great to have started a conversation, but it's also been started by Hello magazine for the most part. It's a very positive outlet. You know, they're very royal friendly, but if they've even been seeing this terrible rising level of abuse across the board, and it's not just the royals, celebrities at large are experiencing more and more abuse because social media sort of allows for armchair pontificators. So I'm glad it's got us talking. Yes. Of course, some of it, as you saw, was met with negativity immediately. But I think all of us as human beings could just stand to do better, learn from mistakes. I don't know about you, Chris, but sometimes someone will write to me because they think I've said something incorrectly, and I'll immediately read it in a critical voice, like they're shouting at me. And actually, no, they're just sort of asking a question. They're just being helpful. And so that's sort of, I suppose, a lesson as well. Don't get defensive right away.
Yes. And the reason they decided to launch the campaign is because not only was the whole Meghan v Kate thing becoming a little bit sort of out of control in the last couple of months, but also that the rival, how do we put this, the rival camps on social media were starting to hurl abuse at one another. And even Kensington Palace has noticed this, and Kensington Palace said, didn't they, just a week or so ago, that they're now having to monitor the online abuse.
Yeah, they're spending hours each week having to moderate the online content, the abuse aimed at both the duchesses. So they're having to talk to Instagram about what they can do, but across all their accounts they're having to moderate the kind of comments that they're getting. And I think what Hello were finding was it was abuse aimed at the duchesses, but also users aiming abuse at each other as well, but also reporters. I think a lot of our royal colleagues are finding they're being targeted as as
Yes, yeah, royal colleagues and myself included, because actually you can say something and people will immediately think, as you were just discussing, immediately think that you're being massively critical of something that one duchess has done or another. Now, as we all know, reporters are meant to be objective, therefore that's not taking sides. Sometimes you have to use a critical voice. In fact, we get criticised for being too sycophantic towards the royals quite often as well. So I mean, it's just that sort of that forum is there. It's a good thing. There's a good side to social media, but there's a very negative side to it as well.
And it kind of flies in the face of everything Kate and Meghan preach. William, not too long ago, is sort of calling people to account about online bullying and how CEOs can be doing more to combat it. They've done so much about mental health awareness around online bullying, about young people taking their own lives because someone said something horrible about them on Instagram. So seeing this fighting going on, this sort of infighting, as you say, between camps is extraordinary, because I think Meghan and Kate actually on a personal level would be horrified.
Well, and there we are. We're talking about rival camps fighting about which duchess you support, and we don't even know for sure whether there is an issue with the two duchesses. In fact, a lot of people seem to think, and you know, the royal sources seem to suggest that the problem is actually between the two brothers, not between the two wives. That said, that opens up a whole new debate about whether or not it's just the sort of that narrative that it's a better narrative, a better story to write if it's about women fighting, not men fighting. Do you agree?
It's as old as time, isn't it, Lizzie? You get successful, beautiful, glamorous young women and you just pit them against each other. I think we all knew around royal wedding that there would be a fall from grace for Meghan because unfortunately that's just how the cycle works. I was just surprised at how fast it happened because she came back from that tour of the South Pacific. You were there, you witnessed it. It was so successful. She didn't put a foot wrong. There were maybe 1 or 2 engagements she missed more at Harry's request, I think, than Meghan's. She did a brilliant job and pregnant.
Yes.
And yet she came back and suddenly it just spiraled out of control.
Even baked banana bread when she went as well.
Yes. There's a running theme on bananas. Yes. Yeah. She did such a good job. And so I thought, oh, well done, Meghan, because the initiation that's involved in a first royal tour and the demands that won them upwards of 76 engagements, you were at most of them. So that will have been nothing short of terrifying, I expect. And so to come back and then be faced with that onslaught, so much of it just pulled out the sky or spin because of clickbait. I think that for Meghan, probably on a personal level, will have been devastating.
And you mentioned clickbait there because you do read certain things in newspapers, but what you tend to read online seems to be sort of worse or magnified, or the headlines are much more exaggerated because obviously people want people to go click, I'll read that story. And that is one of the issues that we're dealing with here.
Yeah, that demand for royal news constantly to be fed means that there's a huge amount more online than in the papers, but it also means that those headlines that people want you to click on.
Yeah. What's the American take on it? Because there's a huge amount of interest at the moment from the other side of the Atlantic. People even watching this show over them. We thank them for doing so. But Americans sort of see it in a different way. They see celebrity, and we don't treat royals as celebrities here, but they see celebrity differently to the way in which we see celebrity. Very
much so. Americans by nature are incredibly positive people. It's what I love about them. They're very optimistic. If you are a self-made millionaire in America, good for you. In England, you're a social climber, how dare you? You know, there's sort of a different approach. They've always had a love affair with the royal family. They've always respected the Queen, but they fell madly in love with Diana. William and Harry are that extension of Diana, so they were very excited about William and Kate's wedding.
And then in comes
one of their own, and that takes it to a whole new level. And so suddenly having an American behind palace walls, I think a lot of people, a lot of Meghan's fans, they think, gosh, that could be me. It suddenly made it so relatable. And then you factor in all these issues that would have been an issue even 5 years ago. An actress divorced, she happens to be biracial. None of these should matter at all, but they would have done at one point. But I think where Americans struggle the most is in seeing that in the UK, as reporters, because they are funded in part by the taxpayer, you have to hold the royal family to account. So we've got Air Miles Andy. How much does Meghan spend on her wardrobe? How much did Charles spend on the royal train? Whereas in America, if there is a public figure that is using something that they are required to use in order to get somewhere, let's take Trump, for example. He uses Air Force One or Marine One to go and play golf.
It won't be cheap.
Won't be cheap, but he won't be criticised because that's what the president needs in order to travel. They're going to be critical if there is a public figure who has been racist, and rightfully so, or has been accused of sexual harassment. So I think they don't understand when everyone gets bent out of shape that Meghan happens to be wearing an Oscar de la Renta dress. They'd be like, well, why does that matter? She earned lots of her own money and it suits the job.
That's also true, isn't it? I mean, a lot of Meghan's wealth is self-made. It came from her acting in Suits and everything else she did before she met Harry as well. So, I mean, a lot of her money doesn't just come from the British taxpayer.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right. So I think it's so I think they've struggled a little bit because there's a lot of new people that are following the royals now because of Meghan. They're inspired by her, they're encouraged by her. They look at her and think, she's like me, I could be like that. And that's fantastic. It's brought a whole new audience to the royal family. But at the same time, you're also bringing people into the fold who perhaps don't understand how the royals are covered.
And Lizzie, we always laugh, don't we, sometimes when you see those stories, Meghan breaks protocol again, like she's wearing, was it black nail varnish, or she's not wearing tights.
Bang my head on the wall.
I mean, royal protocol doesn't really exist in these things, does it?
No.
Oh my God, her dress is above the knee, or
she's not wearing tights, or she's wearing the wrong colour nail varnish. I mean, most of it's just rubbish, to be honest.
Well, it's even a misunderstanding of the word. This is what drives me bonkers, because I think Americans, some of them, the writers are new to it, and so they'll see that there's a headline in the UK, Meghan broke protocol, whether it's a messy bun, black nail polish, or one shoulder dress. But protocol, of course, as we know, refers to how you behave at a diplomatic event. It's who comes in the room first, who sits next to who. It's not tights and clutch handbags. But I think people as well, perhaps, and I'm speculating a little, but I think in the States, they saw Meghan as sort of a revolutionary. She was going to come in and be that breath of fresh air that Kate was, Diana was, Fergie was, everyone's a breath of fresh air at some point. And they were expecting her perhaps to really turn the monarchy on its ear and catapult it into the 22nd century ahead of time. But Meghan hasn't. She's been very smart. She's played the game. She's done what's expected of her. So they're kind of creating this royal rebel narrative that doesn't exist.
Well, if this show existed in the 1990s, we'd probably be having not a dissimilar conversation about Fergie coming into the royal family and perhaps what she was wearing or doing. I mean, I think, as far as I'm concerned, the day that Meghan arrives at something after the Queen, that's when she's broken protocol.
Yes, exactly,
Yes?
exactly.
When the Queen isn't last, Meghan is, well, then clearly there's protocol that's been broken. As for, what colour her nail varnish is, really?
Well, and you can go onto Google Images, it's as simple as that, and put in Royals coloured nail varnish and bunches of them pop up. Even the one-shoulder dresses that she wore to the Fashion Awards, that caused such a brouhaha. And yet you go on like Margaret, the Queen Victoria's even wearing a dress that's off the shoulder. So no, it's bizarre that Meghan is being held to a different standard, and I'm not quite sure why that is.
And again, we could come back to the whole clickbait thing because people want to see, is there an issue here? Is there a problem? Has she done something wrong? When actually she hasn't. And as you say, we think she's conducted herself in a remarkable way, given that the role she's taken on since May the 19th last year is quite something, isn't it?
And I think especially because Kate grew up watching the royal family to some degree. I don't know how much of a royal watcher she was, but she had an understanding. They're the background to all of our lives if you grew up in the UK. We see Trooping the Colour, we see Remembrance Sunday, we see all these events. Meghan came to it with a totally foreign view. I mean, she says herself that she didn't know much about the royal family. Some of the scandals are hard to miss, but she didn't know sort of how regimented and inflexible this calendar is.
Yes, no, quite. And actually, talking of the calendar, we're about to hit one of those markers, aren't we? Accession Day coming up, because we've seen pictures of the Queen at Sandringham every Sunday going to church, as she does various different churches on the Sandringham estates. But Accession Day is nearly upon us.
Nearly upon us, February the 6th.
Right.
And that marks the anniversary of her father's death. So George VI's death. And she always stays at Sandringham until that date to mark the anniversary.
Now, I've forgotten how many years it is now. So was it
67.
1952 to 2019 is 67?
Yeah, so it's 67 this year,
67
which,
years.
for some would say that's a huge cause of celebration, but it's quite poignant, isn't it, that she stays at Sandringham because Accession Day is not to be celebrated. And this is
For her, it marks a very sort of sad moment. It's the day
Very
her
sad.
father died at quite a young age. Really.
While he had been sick, she would never have gone away if they thought he was on the brink of death. And this is what I think people don't quite understand when they say, oh, Charles is desperate for the job. But I think what a weird mind game that must be, that you only get the job you've waited your whole life for because your mother's passed away.
Yeah, it's quite so. And I mean, he's got a full-time job at the moment and he's got an even bigger job to come, but he'll only get that job when his mother passes, which is, it must be most bizarre that no one can really understand.
Nobody could possibly relate to
the royal
that.
family.
Yeah.
Quite so. So the Queen will come back from there, but it's been an eventful time at Sandringham.
Could say that.
Shall we say? I mean, I've spent quite a lot of time in a lay-by in the dark at 6 o'clock in the morning, talking about the sort of glass that was shattered. And so should we just recap what happened? And you spent more time there than I did. They wouldn't let you out.
I was there for 5-6 days in the end.
Yes.
Oh, Lizzie.
Yes. So I can't remember what.
So
day
we
it
walked
was.
out of this studio after.
So I'm a bit nervous to walk out today, actually. What's
and about half an hour later was when
we heard that there had been two cars
to
crash near the Sandringham estate, and one was a Land Rover, and then we found out shortly after that one of those belonged to the Duke of Edinburgh, and rushed off to Sandringham, didn't we?
I think we all thought at first, no, won't be the Duke of Edinburgh's. Don't be silly, it's just a Land Rover in Sandringham. And then we found out it was the Duke of Edinburgh's. And then we saw the picture.
Yeah.
I mean, that was quite something, wasn't it?
It was. And it made you think immediately, it's nothing short of a miracle that anyone walked away from that crash, actually, because a Kia is like a lunchbox when you put it up against a Land Rover.
And that Land Rover had rolled
several
times, according to witnesses. So, it's extraordinary.
I mean, that's like a scene in a movie, isn't it? To think of it rolling and that he got out of there.
And one of the eyewitnesses reports that he removed the Duke from his car through the sunroof because it was lying there on its side.
Yeah.
Now, here's a man, he's had a hip operation less than a year ago. He's 97 years of age. He's just been hit on quite a busy road. The car's rolled and he's come out of the sunroof. And what's his injuries? Nothing at all.
Nothing. Just a little bit of blood, probably from a tiny cut or something. Yeah.
something.
I mean, he
Nothing
didn't even
short of
go
a
to
miracle.
hospital until the following day when they said there were no injuries of concern. I mean, extraordinary that he didn't even need to go to hospital that day.
Yes. Someone did need to go to hospital, Emma Fairweather,
Emma
who,
Fairweather.
and as well as the driver of the car, and fortunately the 9-month-old baby. How lucky are we to be saying that there was no injury at all there? Now, Emma was the one with the broken wrist who then spoke to the Sunday Mirror, and then she spoke to ITV's This Morning. She wasn't desperately happy with the way in which she'd been treated by the palace, was she?
Yeah, I think on the Friday after it happened, a police liaison officer had been in touch with Emma Fairweather, the passenger, to give a message from the palace to her. And that's because at that stage the police can't give out her details because of data protection. And then that following weekend, the palace did try and get in touch with Emma Fairweather. You know, senior members of the household did try and get in touch with her, but they weren't able to reach her. So there was an attempt.
Part of the problem, though, wasn't it, that the palace led us to believe on Friday by saying, you know, private messages have been exchanged or message of well wishes have been exchanged. I forget the former words they used, but it sort of led everyone to believe that they'd been in touch when actually they hadn't. And I wonder whether there was the way in which it was handled by the palace wasn't textbook, shall we say?
No, the palace PR is a well-oiled machine, and it sort of felt like it. Yes, it fell apart in this instance. I mean, I think it was tricky because, of course, Piers Morgan was very vocal in saying that Philip should have called and apologised immediately. But then, at devil's advocate, any insurance company would say you never call and apologise because then you're sort of held accountable.
Didn't say sorry at the scene or anything.
Right, exactly. He's just sort of you stay silent. So I think he was going to be damned either way. But yes, it was messy. It was messy because we were being sent mixed messages, mixed signals, being told one thing when you find out that's not entirely truthful, because then you're held to account as a reporter reporting that information.
You told us on Friday that they'd been in touch when actually they hadn't. And actually, but whatever the palace decides to do, whatever even the Duke's wife told him to do, and we don't know, one thing he did do was get into a car on Saturday and go and drive on a public road, not a private road on the Sandringham estate, and not wear a seatbelt. Now, you know, given we'd been having a national conversation, both online, on television, in the newspapers, about when's the right time to stop driving and, you know, is he safe on the roads? Was that not, I pose this question, the height of insensitivity?
But I think that was the bigger PR problem, not how messages were exchanged. I think
he'd caused the PR problem.
Yeah, I think the fact that a replacement car was delivered a day afterwards, and then he was seen on the Saturday driving without that seatbelt, I think that was the PR problem.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Lizzie. It was just the height of arrogance too. I mean, on the one hand, it was the Duke he does what he pleases. He was saying, I've got to get back on. It was his equivalent of getting back on the horse, I suppose.
I mean, that's a valid point as well. And we should also acknowledge that I think all the royals value the ability to be able to drive. You know, that gives them that sort of bit of independence they don't really have in their lives. And he wanted to get back behind the wheel. It's probably the seatbelt that was the real issue.
It was the seatbelt that was the issue. And actually, I thought it raised an interesting debate because a lot of people came online and said, well, they're so rich, they can have anyone drive them. Why don't they just have chauffeurs everywhere? But I think to a degree, just removing the conversation a little bit, but they don't quite understand because you're exactly right, Chris. Like, as a member of the royal family, you have a police protection officer with you all the time. You can't do anything for yourself. To be able to get into a car and have that little bit of freedom must be intoxicating. So I can see that from the Duke's point of view. But put the seatbelt on. Stay on a private road. Just keep out of the way of cameras. Because I think that was his way of saying something I won't say on camera, but to everybody, you know.
To say I've made my own decision.
Yes, there you go. That was much more polite. Thank you.
But delivering a car. No, we should be clear. It wasn't a brand new car because a lot of people said.
Yes, I'm glad you said that.
It wasn't a brand new car. We think it was one from the Royal Fleet. Perhaps one he uses at Windsor. Because I only know that because Land Rover don't make the Freelander anymore. But that was what he was delivered. But it was almost. I suppose it created the impression I'm all right, Jack. I've got my car. I'm back in it. I'm driving again. Meanwhile, you know, the Kia, the other car, there's a broken wrist, there's some cut knees, there's probably a bit of shock going on, and go through your insurance.
You can't get a car quite so easily again.
Precisely.
And this is where you wonder, this is where you sort of want to smack the royals around a little bit in the nicest possible way, because they sometimes just won't listen to advice, will they? And they know how things are perceived. They are masters at it, and they should know better than anybody else what the narrative was going to be. They see the papers every day, so it was just blatant stupidity and arrogance. And And hopefully someone took the keys off him that night and said, right, you've said your piece.
Well, put it this way, he was not seen, was he, Lizzie? Because trying to find him.
Were you in the bushes? You were in the bushes.
No, I wasn't in the bushes.
Yeah.
I wasn't in the bushes.
But I think
seen.
there were, shall we say, television cameras and
Yeah.
stills photographers trying to get another photo of him, and he wasn't seen.
And you were there for 6 days, so you would have seen him
Possibly.
again.
I mean, it's quite a big
Maybe
date,
finally
but
the Queen had a word with her
Yes,
husband and
yes.
said, right,
That's
give me your
enough.
keys. I'm driving.
You'd like
and
to
then
be
a
fly on the
letter
wall for
was
that one.
written to Emma
Yes.
Fairweather, wasn't it?
And again, we should be fair here. The criticism was he didn't write it for a week. Well, it didn't appear in the Sunday Mirror until a week later, but it was dated on the Monday after the crash, so just like 3 or 4 days afterwards, which
Yeah.
I think is an entirely acceptable level of time, is to write a letter on the Monday after a crash on the Thursday.
I think that's old school. It's nice. Nobody writes letters anymore. I think I'd be quite chuffed to get a letter.
Would be quite
He
nice,
did say
wouldn't it?
sorry. He did say sorry
did
for
say
his
sorry.
part.
Admitted, he must
in
have
the
got it past the
accident.
lawyers, but he sort of admitted that
Yeah.
he was at fault. I mean, there's a police inquiry going on. We don't know what conclusion that will come to, but anyway, that's probably enough on the crash for now. This is another one that we.
Yeah, let's hope not.
I suppose you go from what you just called sort of a stupid incident to what I thought was a very poignant and well planned royal visit, which was Prince William and Kate to Dundee. Now, in the time that they went to the V&A, which is a fantastic building on Dundee, and all to do with the redevelopment of the waterfront in a city that's not having the best of times at the moment, but actually then to do what he did afterwards, we were there when we were at that Michelin factory. I thought was well thought through, shall we say?
So this is the Michelin factory up in Dundee. It's one of the biggest employers in the region. It employs about 850 people, but it's closing down, I think, next year, isn't it? And all the staff will be made redundant, and they're going through a process at the moment to see what else they can offer those workers up there. And Kate and William went to go meet them, didn't they?
Yeah, and actually, what I thought was significant about that is because in the time that I've done this job, I've seen lots of royals go to factories and open a new bit and say, isn't this shiny new? And look at all these new jobs that are coming. Here you had a very senior member of the royal family actually going to people saying, I'm really sorry you're about to lose your job. There's 850 of you, and that's going to be a real blow for this town, or city, Dundee. Therefore, I'm going to come and visit. Now, okay, perhaps he can only offer tea and sympathy, but the fact that he was there and he got councils and union leaders together around a table, I thought was quite a sort of powerful symbol, and might show you something about how William plans to operate into the future.
I think it's very much a leaf out of his mother's book, but that's where royals come into their own for me too. It's a bit like when the Queen went to meet the Grenfell Tower survivors. It's at times of tragedy, it's at times of hardship, where if they come and they say, I hear you, I see what's happening, this is really rubbish and I'm so sorry you're going through this, that's when your sort of regular Joe really stands up and appreciates the royal family, I suppose. But I think it was a really nice touch, because as you say, Chris, normally it's unveil a plaque, it's cut a ribbon, plant a tree, it's all very nice and shiny and perfect. So I think that was a really, really personal touch to go and really listen to what was happening and what was going on.
And talking of unveiling plaques, it was the Queen who had unveiled a plaque there at the very same factory. Was it in 2016? So about sort of
Not
3 or 4
long
years
ago.
before, to say, oh, here's a new bit, here's a new extension, and yet then her grandson's back there 4 years later to say, oh God, you're all being made redundant, the tyre factory's closing down. And 850 people, that's a lot of people.
And it's quite hard to go in as a royal, isn't it? Because on paper, they've sort of got everything. They lead what people assume is a rather easy life.
Yes.
Of course, we know, seeing behind the scenes, the things that they sacrifice. But to then be able to go and identify with the person who's lost their job and could lose their house as a result and doesn't know how they're going to feed their children, that shows a really personal touch to Prince William, that he's able to interact on that level and make them feel heard and recognised.
I think the people that we met sort of families, people that had worked there through various generations. It meant a lot to them.
I bet it did, yeah.
Now, I asked a few people if they wanted to give us some questions on Twitter. Now, a lot of the questions are about how great it is having you on the panel and how very excited
nice.
people are about it completely. How about giving Meghan a break today? Well, I don't know whether that was like don't talk about her or only talk about her positively. But
okay, well, we've been very positive so far. I don't think there's anything negative to say.
I don't think we can do the show without talking about her at the moment. We'll talk about the other visit that she did to Bristol recently as well. But I think, again, there's another question here about how the British treats their royal family, and we touched on that before. I think the Americans do find it very strange, the way in which we are very critical of the royal family, in the way in which I don't think they would be in America.
It's just the way we are. It was super. I remember when I came over to cover the Diamond Jubilee, and the British papers, in their usual fashion, was nobody cares, nobody's going to show up, waste of money, what's the point? Well, 4 days, people flocked to London. I was by the River Thames on pageant day. It was grim. I'd have given anything to be at home with my slippers on. And there were the Queen and Prince Philip standing front and centre, standing for the whole thing. Of course, Prince Philip sadly got ill afterwards. But that, to me, really spoke volumes about this deep-rooted affection the British do have for the royal family. It's just when you've got Brexit going on and when you've got other things going on, and when people are struggling and suffering, and yet we're talking about what people are wearing and how much it costs, then that's where the criticism starts to come in. But I think deep down we love them.
2 questions here about babies, actually. Linda, we have discussed Linda Wing before. Do you think they're having it in the window? We're still going for Frimley Park Hospital, where Sophie Wessex had her baby, but I don't think it'll be Linda Wing. But
I don't know.
I guess.
I think Linda Wing is, they've got experience of dealing with royal births, so I think
that's the reason I think it may. Well, a couple of
they don't need to worry about red lights, traffic lights, do they?
No, exactly. I think for the Linda Wing, there's a couple of issues at play here. First of all, that it's seen the most royal births, so it's a well-oiled machine. They know how to do it. They know how to be discreet, but also they know how to manage the madness that surrounds it. Frimley Park, because royals want to be as minimally disruptive as possible, and you can do that at the Linda Wing. It's a little harder.
You do it in an NHS hospital, Frimley Park.
When you're Harry and Meghan.
Well, quite so. Yeah. The other question was related to the baby. Do you think Harry will take paternity leave?
Yes, I would have thought so.
They're quite a modern couple, aren't they?
Yeah.
And I think he'll be quite hands-on, and I think he'll want to be anyway, but I think Meghan will definitely encourage that from him. So yeah, I think perhaps we'll see that.
I think he's going to have a hard time going back to work, actually, because he's going to be a great dad. You've seen him when he's with children, and particularly when he's with children that are suffering.
I mean, that brings us quite nicely onto Frogmore, where the movement.
Yeah.
We ran a story a couple of days ago, and you can find it online on our royal pages about the date that they're moving into Frogmore. Now, we didn't know for sure whether it would be before baby or after baby, because there's renovation works going on. And what always happens when you have renovation work?
It always runs long.
Always runs over. I mean, I was told the other day that they would be moving in March. So, a good 4 to 6 weeks before the baby's due.
Which will be great, because it allows them just to get settled, and not that I think they'll be unpacking their own boxes, but at least it allows Meghan to have a bit of time to put her feet up as well, because there is going to be a point where she stops working and just sort of gets ready for baby. But I think they're so ready to be out of London, don't you?
And Frogmore does sort of tick a lot of boxes, doesn't it? I mean, it's much more private than Kensington. Kensington Palace, for anyone who doesn't know, I mean, it's in the middle of London, and it is quite sort of accessible, visible. You can't really go about your daily business without someone seeing you. Frogmore offers them not only sort of privacy, a bit of space closer to the countryside, but not being a million miles from London.
And I think that you just hit the nail on the head. That ticks all the boxes, because I think if William and Kate had an option, they'd love to live at Anmore Hall, but they can't. It's just too far away. Not to mention the kids' schools.
That's the one in Norfolk.
The one in Norfolk, exactly. So they retreat there whenever they can. Whereas Windsor, it's great, especially if you've got police outriders. You can be in London in no time at all. They're close to Heathrow, given the Commonwealth travel they're likely to be doing. Yeah. And as you say, it's more private. They walk out their back door at Frogmore, and it's just rolling countryside. It sounds idyllic. Yes. Yeah, and a lovely place to raise children.
And we don't know the name of the black Labrador yet, do we?
Still, we don't know.
It's a Guy or Bogart. One got left in...
Guy's here, Bogart.
Bogart got left in Canada.
Yes.
Guy's here, and they also have a black Labrador. No one knows their name.
And was it Guy that made the cameo with the Queen at the royal wedding? Was it him in the car?
Well, that
certainly looked like
speculated.
Yes. So the big royal secret of the moment is
I thought she might take Minnie home from Mayhew, but
yes.
So they've got their hands full.
Yeah.
And I was at an event with Prince Charles in the week where he was in Coventry doing a few things. Again, opening a nice brand new shiny factory, which is again, it was the juxtaposition with what Prince William was doing a day later in Dundee. But Charles and Camilla are as busy as ever at the moment, aren't they? I mean, they're doing some events this week, and we actually got him to get into a London cab.
Fantastic.
And that allowed me to write the joke on Twitter, you never guess who I had in the front of my cab today. But it was quite an interesting event, and he really engages in these things, doesn't he? He really is, and he likes to get around the country as well.
Are they making electric cabs yet?
They are.
Of course, he's
every
the
single
front
cab
runner.
that comes off that production line, 40 of them a day. I can give you lots of facts about London.
Yeah, love this.
40 of them a day, and they are all electric, every single one.
Well, he must have been delighted then, because people just don't give Charles the credit, do they? they? But he's been so forward-thinking, whether it's the environment or plastics or electric cars. Of course, first member of the royal family to drive an electric car. So I think that's great that he was there and championing what they're doing.
Yes, exactly. So I was going to hop in the back and say, can you give me a lift back to London? But I thought that
with your seatbelt on.
Maybe I'll be breaking protocol if I said that.
Yeah.
Let's get back to, again, the Duchess of Sussex. She's been so busy lately. She's now been to all 4 of her patronages. So the first one was SmartWorks,
yes.
Which we spoke about last time, where they train and dress women, particularly those from minority groups for work. She went to the animal charity, the Mayhew, and then this week we went on the tour. We had the rota, hence the name Royal Rota. We had the Royal Rota for Meghan's visit to the National Theatre.
The National Theatre, yeah. So she went there, last week now, and she met all sorts of sections of the theatre. She met apprentices, she met children who are involved with the National Theatre, and she met people who are involved in what's called their public acts performances, which is getting people from community groups to perform alongside professional actors.
And the piece we did on the news that night was all about Meghan wanting to use this patronage to make theatre more accessible. In other words, if you think of theatre, a little bit middle class, a little bit white, a little bit London based.
Yeah.
So they were talking about reaching different parts of the community. But also they're taking this thing up to Doncaster in Yorkshire as well. For anyone in America who doesn't know, that's a long way from London. But actually just making theatre a bit more accessible and
getting kids involved.
Less posh, basically.
Yeah.
So,
and nice to see her return to her theatre roots, I suppose, or her acting roots.
She was very comfortable there, wasn't she?
I bet she was. And see, what I liked is, given it's only 4 patronages so far, which, when you compare to the Queen who's got 600 odd, we're early in Meghan's career, but she's covered all of her key interests. So there's education, there's women's welfare, there's animals, and there's the theatre, there's the arts. Yeah. So I think it is really well chosen.
Education was one we haven't mentioned, which was the Association of Commonwealth Universities, which she's also been to. So she's ticked off all 4.
Yeah.
So she can now go off on
maternity leave,
having announced her patronages and been to them all. Yeah. And then quite an interesting visit, I thought, by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex to Bristol. Not only was it snowing, you don't often get royal walkabouts in the snow.
No, you don't.
Some beautiful pictures. If you look on our Instagram page, and if you didn't know, we have a Royals Instagram page now, ITV News Royals. But there were some key visits, weren't there, as well? And so I get them. One of the most talked about things was to do with this.
With the bananas, yes.
And what she did with how do you say in America? A Sharpie.
A Sharpie, yes. Or I would say felt tip.
We'd say marker
old
pen
school.
Or something.
You say marker now.
So now, when you explain
well, you see, it's terrible. If you ask a British person to write something empowering, we can't possibly. We get too embarrassed, and we'll
write
just
something
put
empowering
something
to you, where you talk about what she did. So.
Okay, I look forward to seeing this.
Yeah.
No, I think so. Little known fact, but in Princess Diana's day, she used to go out some nights around Paddington and she would find working girls and she would give them some money and tell them to go home. And that's how a royal could be involved with a sex worker back in the day. And here we've sort of come full circle where Meghan can write on bananas that are going to be given to sex workers to try and encourage them to get off the streets, to feel good about themselves. It's very American. Americans love an empowering phrase like that. As I said at the start of the show, they're very positive.
You are strong, you are brave.
You are loved.
You are loved.
Special or strong.
You're special.
Yes,
strong.
yeah.
So, and again, I mean, there was a huge amount of debate about bananas and why she did it and whether you should use a Sharpie to write on a felt tip pen to write on a... I mean, God, the important message here was these are women who have very little choice in their lives other than to work on the streets. Yeah. And there was someone who was writing them a message to say, with your food parcel that we're giving you, we are also going to give you a little message, and I hope that you might take something small, positive from it.
It was a gesture. What I liked is it was very spontaneous. I also thought it was incredibly generous of Meghan to credit it to the teacher that she'd heard this idea from.
Yeah, it came from the States, didn't it? School lunch programme that she'd heard about happening in the States. That's where she kind of got the idea from.
Which was lovely. And then being very sensible, some people said, well, she should have written on an apple. Well, you can't chew an apple skin. If you've got Sharpie on it, it's going to be a little bit toxic.
I don't normally eat the banana skins. So,
exactly.
Yes.
So I think it was a perfect case of you're damned either way if you're a member of the royal family. It came from a really generous place.
Again, that is my point, isn't it? And to a group of women who are in a very difficult position, and therefore, and they were visiting this charity, 125 it was called, wasn't it? And I thought it was a very, very kind, very important gesture. on her behalf.
There was lovely footage. Lizzie was saying earlier about Harry. I love how we were saying how he sort of stands back and just, oh, what's she up to now? And he just loves to see what she's going to do next.
Gives her the space. She just sort of said, I've got an idea, and that I'll be in charge of the banana messaging, and Harry stands back and lets her.
Off you go.
To her, like, your handwriting's better than mine.
Yes.
So anyway, there's my handwriting, and there's my message to you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Hashtag.
Do you think it's worth anything on eBay if I sort of peel the skin off?
You probably have to pay someone to take it from you.
I will treasure that, Chris. I will treasure it always. Thank you.
And this week, I mean, just looking very quickly ahead this week, Child Mental Health Week. So actually, it's the Duchess of Cambridge who's out quite a lot doing things on that this week.
It's Children's Mental Health Week, and the charity Place to Be, which is the Children's Mental Health charity, is very involved in this week, and Kate is their patron, and she's obviously very involved in kind of supporting early intervention and supporting the children's mental health, and she's got a couple of visits to schools this week, which we will go along to
on the next Royal Rota. So there's your banana.
Oh, thanks.
So you get one each.
I don't get a message.
This is how we pay people for coming on the show. We just give them a piece of fruit.
Well, I love it. I love it. I'll treasure it forever.
I mean, there is so much going on with the Royals. I'm wondering whether we need to start doing this show every day soon. But a lot's happened since we last did it. It's been an absolute pleasure having you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your contribution. It's been really good, and also I think very important to discuss how they see the Royals from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, which I think is very important. So
and all very positive. So long may that last.
Yes, actually. So maybe we should make this show very positive, and we'll appeal to those watching in America. Lizzie, thank you again. And we will bring you another Royal Rota when we have a lot more to talk about, I am sure. Hopefully no car crashes next time. But we appreciate you watching. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.